to do the research I wanted to do, I needed to locate a large agency that would be willing to be the site for such research. And I did put forward proposals to welfare departments in Toronto, Ottawa, and Edmonton without success. I met with Dr. Schwartz and was invited to join the team of doctoral students that were involved in this very large-scale project on staff utilization at the University of Chicago.
His research influenced his own administrative practice and teaching, and was a major component of the Midway Project. This was a large-scale experiment designed to increase efficiency and accountability of social service organizations by better task analysis, classification, cost-benefit evaluation, and other management techniques.
For a period of 3 years, I spent a part of every month in Toronto and in Chicago, because except for 3 months, I was carrying a full workload at the University of Toronto and in the School of Social Work there, while I was working on my dissertation in Chicago.
Years later, from 2000 to 2004, Jim conducted annual exit surveys of MSW graduates at the University of Calgary to better understand the employment patterns of graduates and how educational programs could enhance their performance and practice. Another example of Jim's early efforts to build social worker skills included the installation of the first comprehensive audiovisual studio at a Canadian university. Regrettably, the unit was dismantled in 1973 when Jim left Carleton. During that time, Jim recognized another venture to expand social work's professional base: independent or private practice. In 1978 in Calgary, Alberta, Jim and I, along with 4 colleagues in psychology, founded a private practice group that he named Janus Associates, because therapy looked to the past and the future. In the latter part of his career, Jim volunteered on the private practice committee of the Alberta College of Social Workers, strengthening the voices of private practitioners. He did this by fostering the development of standards of practice, lobbying insurance companies to cover social work services, creating a website, proposing a computerized registry, not to mention preliminary work on a book on private practice in North America. With Audrey Ferber, Jim designed the first university course in Canada on private practice and social work, offering it in 2000 and then 2001 with me. Jim demonstrated his belief in the importance of social work's organizational base, not only by being a member of major U.S. and Canadian professional organizations, but also by serving in various executive capacities. For example, he became a member of the Canadian Association of Social Workers in 1951 and a member of the Executive Board of Directors of CASW in 1969 through to 1971, as well as being treasurer in 1971. A most noteworthy achievement related to his being an early and strong proponent of Canadian schools of social work being accredited by a Canadian body. During the late 1950s and 60s, Jim was a member of an ad hoc committee of Canadian schools of social work that was discussing the need for a more permanent organization to promote and coordinate university social work education in Canada. He was a founding member in 1967 of the Canadian Association of Schools of Social Work, and he served on several committees, including in 1969, a 5-member committee that drafted the Constitution. In 1997, he received an Honorary Life Membership Award in recognition of his devoted attention to building social work's organizational base. With respect to the fledgling field of human sexuality, dominated by psychologists in the 1970s, Jim envisioned social workers becoming significantly engaged in sex education, sex counseling, and therapy. To demonstrate our credibility, we became life members of the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists in 1978, and among the earliest social workers to join and to demonstrate that social workers could engage in this field of practice. Later, we both served on certification committees. Judy Cypher, former president of AASECT, wrote to Jim in 1996, "My sincere appreciation for your time, talent, and energy for our association. The success of my term of leadership has a great deal to do with the time and support you have given. My thanks for your wisdom and your spirit of service to AASECT." In 1978, we joined the Canadian Sex Research Forum, the first social workers to do so. Jim became its executive director in 1992-93. For his service to CSRF, he received a Distinguished Service Award. During the 1970s and 80s, he was one of the first Canadians to become active in the US-based group for the advancement of doctoral education. He highlighted the importance of social work doctoral studies in Canada by contributing his own research on Canadian doctorates in social work in 1982. From 1976 onward, he was a member of the Alberta College of Social Workers, later serving in an exemplary fashion for many years on its private practice and disciplinary committees, and ultimately being awarded a Pulse of Social Work Award in 2006. Jim's inquiring mind and his lifelong love of technology dovetailed early in his career. He pursued an endless series of fascinating questions, resulting in his ongoing demonstration of the importance of research to social work's professional standing. Promoting a research-based profession was a major lifelong career goal and entailed a diverse range of activities. In the mid-1960s, as a doctoral student based at the University of Chicago, Jim learned 2 computer languages, Fortran and COBOL, and developed his own statistical programs for analyzing the non-parametric statistics in his thesis data. He was the first social work doctoral student at the University of Toronto to use a computer to analyze his thesis data. He graduated in 1967 and was the 5th of the early Canadian social work PhDs.
In Toronto, I was more a consumer than a producer. I was working as hard as I could on my dissertation and really learning about research to my participation in that large, well-developed field experiment in research utilization. The doctoral program at the University of Toronto could hardly be dignified with that term at that point. During the period that I was there were only 3 other doctoral students in the program, none of them in my year, so I didn't have any fellow students to learn with. When I got to Chicago, there were 7 other doctoral students in the project, and they were quite a mix in terms of their backgrounds, their ethnicity, and so forth. So that was a very exciting experience. And the project had 3 exceptional consultants attached to the project that were available to us for consultation.
Based on his own learning at the University of Chicago, Jim introduced computers in 1964-65 to the 22 MSW group thesis students he supervised in Toronto. They were perhaps the first Canadian social work students to use computers in their studies, in particular for their thesis data analysis. During the 1960s, Jim pioneered practice-oriented and evaluation research. In his children's aid work, he designed a computer simulation of adoption services that demonstrated the cost-effectiveness of services for adoption of hard-to-place children. He also conducted research to more accurately assess suitable foster homes and to predict adoption placement outcomes. Around that same time, at St. Patrick's School of Social Welfare, when it was at the University of Ottawa, Jim determined factors that increase the likelihood of accepted candidates actually following through on their acceptance, thereby enabling faculty to plan more effectively for incoming students. Such initiatives represent the dawning of the digital age in Canadian social work. In 1966, Jim had the unusual opportunity to become Canada's first consultant on welfare research and principal grants officer for welfare research and demonstration. For 2 years, he traveled coast to coast, meeting with ministers and agency social workers. Apart from regularly losing umbrellas, he sparked numerous research and demonstration grants, enabling practitioners to bring their research questions to the forefront. He delighted in offering consultation on proposal and grant writing, design, methodology, and analysis of projects to bring them to fruition. His commitment to promoting research is evident in the remarks of his colleague, Évariste Thériault, who wrote in 2005, Gripton helped the Canadian Welfare Council to develop a national housing survey of recipients of social assistance. While at Carleton University School of Social Work, he continued to assist us with the analysis of the housing survey, though he was no longer with the National Welfare Grants Program, and his daughter Judy assisted with coding questionnaires. The results of his work during these 2 years demonstrated to the federal government that social work research had come of age and could significantly influence practice and policy. Jim also recognized the validity and importance of knowing and using one's own experience to prompt social research. For example, in the early 1980s, his heart issues led him to study the psychosocial aspects of cardiovascular surgery. His research often spurred him and others to advocacy. In 1987, Jim had his first angioplasty videotaped so that physicians could lobby the provincial government to fund equipment for an empty heart surgery operating unit. A demonstration project on the potential of social work services in a hospital emergency setting followed. This area of practice has become much more widely recognized as critical to improving a patient's well-being. Jim was not an elitist with respect to the promotion of research. He envisioned all social workers as research-oriented. After Joel Fisher's stunning indictment in 1973, Has Mighty Casework Struck Out?, Jim allied himself with an emerging movement to strengthen social work roles by making them more research-based. By 1978, he had proposed a redefinition of the role of the clinical social worker as a practitioner researcher and was teaching a series of courses involving practicum-related assignments to prepare students for this role. We now hear so much about evidence-based practice. In the 1980s, Jim espoused single-system designs for clinical practice and taught social workers to demonstrate effectiveness of their interventions by systematically evaluating their practice. An excellent example is his, Helen Allison, and Dr. Margaret Rodway's research on social work services as a component of palliative care with terminal cancer patients, conducted in the early 1980s. Jim foresaw a laptop in every social worker's office, and to this end, from 1983 to 1986, with Leo de Groot and Dr. Paul Licker, he conducted a major social work demonstration project at the Alberta Children's Hospital in Calgary, the Digital Social Worker, Microcomputers in Clinical Social Work. This project developed a computerized clinical record for family therapy and was designed to facilitate social workers' collection of data to improve practice. In his own clinical private practice, started in 1976, Jim used goal attainment scaling, the Hudson scales, and charting of clients' behavioral changes. His clients found his approach intriguing, empowering, and eminently practical. Years later, after his death, I have heard former clients speak highly of his systematic and compassionate approach to clinical practice. In promoting a research-based profession, Jim believed that the shortage of PhD social workers was a serious drawback. From 1955 to 1987, the University of Toronto was the only PhD program in English-speaking Canada. In 1976, Jim took on the task of developing the University of Calgary's first social work PhD proposal. This was accepted in principle in the 1980s. From 1977 to 1980, Jim supervised the faculty's first special case social work PhD, Dr. Kathleen Kufeld, who graduated in 1980. The culmination of his vision of social work as a science-based profession was the production of the State of the Art of Social Work Research, published in 1995. This was a major CASSW-initiated research project for which Jim was principal investigator, conducting surveys of social work faculty members and administrators of Canadian social work education units. The team, comprised of Jim and Drs. Alan Irving, Marianne Murphy, and Butch Nutter, produced the only Canadian compendium of research in the personal social services. The second wave of feminism emerged in social work in the late 1960s. Jim believed that his undergraduate years in psychology during the 1940s, as the only man with 6 female colleagues, attuned him to what would later become known as women's issues. Analysis and preparation of Canada's first national survey on childcare, entitled Daycare in Canada, a National Survey, for the Canadian Council on Social Development in 1969-71, led Jim to realize how important childcare was to women in the pursuit of their careers. He labeled the study a non-study of non-daycare services in Canada and declared, if women are to be given opportunities to equal men and to develop themselves as persons through education and employment, then society must make arrangements such as daycare services for redistributing the responsibilities of child rearing. For the remainder of his career, he advocated for a national child care program. In the early 1970s, concerned about equity in admissions to St. Patrick's School of Social Welfare at Carleton University, Jim devised a system of blind admissions. This resulted in a 70-30 female-to-male ratio, much to the consternation of some faculty who preferred a 50-50 split. Jim's support of feminist perspectives in social work curricula in the early 1970s provided the impetus for hiring Helen Levine, if only as a sessional. Her impact, along with others, helped transform St. Patrick's School of Social Welfare into the feminist school in Canada. His major contribution in terms of promoting gender equity was his groundbreaking national survey of Canadian social workers conducted in the early 1970s and conceived initially as a study of employment practices within the workforce of the Canadian Association of Social Workers. It was published in 1974 and entitled Sexism in Social Work, Male Takeover of a Female Profession. Providing his own early definition of sexism, Jim revealed social work's discriminatory career practices toward women. Women were underrepresented in administrative positions. Their salaries, despite comparable education, tended to be lower than men's, and they didn't proceed as quickly in their careers as men. As his respected colleague Gail Gilchrist James stated, this was the study that blew the lid off social work's complacency regarding its own sexist practices.
The results were that there were very substantial salary differences that could only be explained as discrimination against women, because I was able to control for length of time in practice and education, and the only reasonable explanation was that women were dealt with differently as far as salaries are concerned. Then I decided to look at the career development of men and women were these controls for exercise, and found that men moved much more quickly up the career ladder to senior positions in the organization. And then I thought, well, why not look at what's happening in schools of social work, in academic careers. And I had information on how long they'd been in those careers, how long it had taken them to move from one level to another, whether they had doctorates or not. And again, the same results, that women with comparable levels of education and experience were moving much more slowly in their academic careers than men. When I looked at how many directors of social work at that time were women as compared with men, for women, 0. So there was